Bring Nintendo games to PC. Bring them to other consoles. Nintendo is doomed to third party. Whenever I hear comments like this, I always just scratch my head. Why? Why would Nintendo make such a change when it seems that everything is working in their favor? There have been some rather big changes in the gaming landscape over the last 10 years. Microtransactions are commonplace now, physical games gave way to digital, but mostly the shift of what constitutes an exclusive. Exclusives were easily understood before, a game that released only for one platform. When looking at Nintendo, there's tons of those. But over time, exclusives became a bit convoluted. Timed exclusives and console exclusives. These are games that start off on one platform for, well, a limited time, normally a year or two. Then they go elsewhere. Then the latter being locked to one console, but then it goes to PC. It all just became a little weird. Gone were the days of pillar mascots in gaming. Mario was Nintendo, Uncharted was Sony, and Halo was Microsoft. But over the 2020s, Microsoft and Sony began releasing their flagship games on PC and smaller titles to Switch. But in 2025, the gaming world would hear news that I think shocked a lot of people. Halo, Master Chief, the icon for Xbox, would be making its way over to PS5. This felt like a white flag was being raised by Microsoft, that the console wars were really over. And it felt that Nintendo's competitors, at least to me, there wasn't much left to care about on those consoles. Then it left me thinking, the only company that really has remained constant was Nintendo. Nintendo continued to support their consoles with true system-defining exclusivity. But why? Why didn't Nintendo change up? And I think that's all answered in Nintendo's philosophy. Hardware is the delivery system, and the software, the games, are the identity. Exclusives harken back to Nintendo's early years. Games that placed Nintendo into the limelight now all started back in the 80s with the NES, as well as the introduction of the seal of quality. Nintendo's smaller division launched in a market where gaming was being phased out. Piracy, lack of quality control, and oversaturation flooded the market. Nintendo's plan was to introduce a method of identifying games that not only would be officially licensed, but worth your time. Luckily, developers who would become legends in the gaming conversation were working their way towards Nintendo. Most specifically, Shigeru Miyamoto. Miyamoto introduced the world to Donkey Kong, Mario, and The Legend of Zelda. Just a few short years later, and the Kirby series would be developed by Masahiro Sakurai and Satoru Iwata, two developers who would become legends in their own right. And it all started with Nintendo back in the 80s. These fundamental icons were core to what many would deem gaming. As time would continue, new consoles would come from Nintendo. New franchise icons would enter the game. These characters of Mario, Donkey Kong, Kirby, and so on were instrumental with the formation and early success of Nintendo. Their history is Nintendo history, making it hard to separate the two. And to think other consoles or PCs could ever officially grace that Nintendo logo before the start of a game, it just feels like it abolishes their tradition. Nintendo doesn't just have franchises. They are pillars of gaming. Mario didn't just define platformers, he defined video games. The Legend of Zelda reshaped adventure design, not once, but repeatedly. Mario Kart became the blueprint for party racing. And Smash Bros? It created a crossover universe no other company could ever dream of. These aren't just seasonal hits, these are cultural landmarks. Their legacy is one that Nintendo fiercely protects. Nintendo isn't like PlayStation or Xbox, who are just sections of a larger corporation. Everything they do rides on their games. Another key factor to Nintendo's exclusives comes from their game design. For much of Nintendo's modern era, the company was shaped at the highest levels by people who understood the games, not just from a boardroom table, but the controller. This leadership culture created an environment where fun came first. The focus was always on creating new and unique ways to engross the fans. While the rest of the industry chased graphical power, online ecosystems, and subscription models, Nintendo focused on something simpler, but harder to achieve: joy, creativity, play. Games like the recent Donkey Kong Bonanza is an excellent example of this. Its original concept started with a Goomba and this enemy from Super Mario Odyssey. Developers wanted to target some game where destruction was core to the mechanics, and after short attempts at this design, they realized how fun it was. And then DK with his strength came into play later. But we've seen simple mechanics work as the basis of fun to start new franchises as well. Like Splatoon, starting from turf battling tofu, the team wanted to introduce a new fun experience to players. There were no genres that they wanted to reshape, nothing to redefine, but they wanted to make something that was addicting and interesting. Glossing over a lot of their brainstorming and feedback, simplistic fun turf tofu would become the basis of a new type of game, Splatoon. Now sure, any console maker could do this, and DK doesn't have to stay with Nintendo for the fun to be maintained. But when you compound it with the history, along with the legacy, it makes it not only a risk for Donkey Kong to move to another platform, but it's kind of pointless. Joy, creativity, and play. These values require control, intention, and exclusivity to preserve them. There's a quote, often attributed to Shigeru Miyamoto, that's kind of become something of a creed. A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is bad forever. Now, there is some debate who started that quote, but we aren't here for that. But it's more than a slogan, it's a worldview. Nintendo will delay, they will redo, restart, and take as long as necessary to create something masterful. And we've seen that, with Breath of the Wild being delayed again and again, Tears of the Kingdom, and most recently Metroid Prime 4, where development completely restarted 2 years into its work. It's because they care about that seal of quality. They want to make sure it's true for their games. There are a few that miss the mark, don't get me wrong, I'm looking at you Mario Strikers, but when they deliver, they really do, letting us explore these worlds for countless hours, being able to play these games years later and rediscover the magic that's in them. Plus, it doesn't hurt Nintendo to invest years in honing their craft to sell gangbusters. A large majority of their games become evergreen titles. Look at Mario Kart 8. The highest selling Switch game of the last generation was a deluxe version of a Wii U game. And when we look past the highest selling game, the top 10 list for their console, it's almost always Nintendo published. It's been that way for generations. Why would they want to share the profit? Games, since about the Game Boy for handhelds and the Wii for home consoles, have taken shape around the console they're on. Nintendo knows the constraints of their systems better than anyone else. With that, they know what stress they can put on the console. As well, the console-defining gimmick would be used to shape different experiences. Look at Wii Sports, a fun, simple title meant to showcase the Wii's motion controls. Its global recognition is partly because it was packed in with the console, and partly because it was so simple to understand. Being on a standard controller, you would lose some of that wow factor. The success Nintendo had with motion controls would catch the attention of Sony and Microsoft. They would attempt their own versions, but they missed the point. Nintendo's motion controls were not only easy to understand, but they had enjoyable software to back up the hardware. Games like Spirit Tracks on the DS. It was completely designed around the hardware, using the touchscreen for nearly everything. It helped define the console itself. Nintendo games define the devices they run on. Take them off those devices, and you lose something essential. You lose the uniqueness. This is why their exclusives stay where they are. Not because they can't go anywhere else, but because they shouldn't. Coming into the current era of Nintendo and the Switch 2, there have been plenty of interesting conversations. Game keycards may be a negative for some, maybe the console isn't as powerful as the PS5 Pro or Xbox, but its strength doesn't always come from horsepower. Its successes will live and die on the basis of two simple things. As long as the marketing remains strong, clear, and concise, the creativity and its exclusives will do the rest of the work. And that already rings true from what we've seen for the first 6 months. Nintendo hasn't stopped delivering stellar games. While I'll admit, Mario Kart World could have been a little more fleshed out, titles like Donkey Kong Bonanza and Kirby Air Riders show that amazing, highly replayable games are bound to push sales. And with Metroid Prime 4 looking as promising as ever, Switch 2 looks like it's going to continue delivering. All this before a mainline Zelda, Mario, or Pokemon comes to the console, and we could be seeing something similar to the Switch era in terms of sales. So, why does Nintendo keep its games exclusive? Nintendo's games remain exclusive not out of stubbornness, but out of purpose. When a company like Nintendo builds its games with legacy, history, and philosophy in mind, those games belong exactly where they were crafted, with Nintendo, on Nintendo, as part of Nintendo's identity. When the rest of the industry seems to be tearing down walls, Nintendo keeps theirs standing, not to keep players out, but to keep something magical in, because Nintendo games are more than just entertainment. They are Nintendo's identity. Thanks for watching. Till next time.